Is that a right of life? When the young children of this country are being reared into a sphere which is more owned by 12 men than it is by 120 million people? Was any one man born to inherit $10 billion and another man born to inherit nothing? Huey Pierce Long is probably the most important politician in American history that you haven't heard of. Born in a log cabin in 1893 in poverty-stricken Winfield, Louisiana, to a low-class family, Long would eventually rise to become one of America's most influential men. His Share Our Wealth plan and slogan, "Every Man a King," captured the hearts and minds of the American people at rates we haven't seen since, winning Louisiana's 1928 gubernatorial election with 96% of the vote. As a senator, he rose to such popularity by 1935 that even FDR was nervous of a potential Huey Long bid for the presidency. Despite being racially egalitarian in 1920s Louisiana, Long found massive electoral success through his focus on economic issues. To succeed as a leftist politician in reactionary Louisiana, Long utilized a new form of rhetoric for the time: rhetorical class consciousness. Born from the populist movements of the Industrial Revolution, rhetorical class consciousness was not crafted by a lone essayist, but rather by the Union men, organizers, and revolutionaries of history to accomplish their political causes. It's not a single goal, but an evolving framework that changes to fit the times. Huey Long's rhetorical class consciousness is prescient, and it applies even more so today as the wealth and power of the United States are increasingly concentrated into the hands of the top 1%. This is Every Man a King, delivered to the people of 1934 America via radio address by the man who proved too much for FDR, Huey Long. This speech can be found on American Rhetoric. We have in America today, my friends, a condition by which about 10 men dominate the means of activity in at least 85% of the activities that you own. They either own directly everything, or they've got some kind of mortgage on it, with a very small percentage to be accepted. They own the banks, they own the steel mills, they own the railroads, they own the bonds, they own the mortgages, they own the stores, and they have chained the country from one end to the other until there is not any kind of business that a small, independent man could go into today and make a living. And they have finally and gradually eliminated everybody from the fields in which there is a living to be made, and still they have got little enough sense to think that they ought to be able to get more business out of it anyway. If you reduce a man to the point where he is starving to death and bleeding and dying, how do you expect that man to get hold of any money to spend with you? It cannot be done. Then, ladies and gentlemen, how do you expect people to live when the wherewith cannot be had by the people? It's important to note off the bat that his language is immediately personal, showing exactly how the wealthiest members of society inflict everyday suffering on every American. This fulfills an important tenet of the rhetoric of class consciousness, the identification of the ruling class as a root of society's problems. His further clarification that the problem is only about 10 men helps to insulate Americans from potentially sympathizing with his target. In this case, it helps that it's true, as the robber barons consolidated power during the Gilded Age and subsequent Depression. The working class was increasingly isolated from the American political scene. This rhetorical strategy is even more applicable today, as America's wealth disparity only widens quarter over quarter. According to the Federal Reserve's 2024 Wealth Report, the top 10% of wealthy Americans own 67.3% of the U.S.'s wealth, while the bottom 50% only own 2.4% of it. From here, the rich only gain wealth, as the Department of Government Efficiency runs wild on America's programs, and the Trump administration passes $4.5 trillion in tax cuts for the ultra-wealthy. Said the Lord, in effect, if you see these things that now have occurred and exist in this and other countries, there must be a constant scattering of wealth in any country if this country is to survive. Then, said the Lord, in effect, Every 7th year there shall be a remission of debts. There will be no debts after 7 years. That was the law. I hope you understand that I'm not quoting scripture to convince you of my goodness personally, because that is something as to how I stand with my Maker. But the Lord gave his law, and in the book of James they said so, that the rich should weep and howl for the miseries that had come upon them. And therefore it was written that when the rich hold goods they could not use and could not consume, you will inflict punishment on them, and nothing but days of woe ahead of them. This section reveals Long's hidden genius. He quotes the Bible, then practically all Americans' pillar of moral reasoning, to make a blatantly anti-wealthy point. Not only this, he quotes the Lord directly and instills in the audience contempt for the powerful. Long's fulfillment of the next tenet of the rhetoric of class consciousness, the big tent, communicates this further. The big tent uses broadly supported values, ideas, and iconography in order to build support by any means possible. At this point in American history, in the midst of depression, it's important to note that the combination of biblical righteousness and severe contempt among the general population for the wealthy make a politically powerful team. The tent that Long pitches in this statement appeals to many people's most important moral pillar, religion, and as such enables their belief in what could be considered outlandish before hearing him out. Now we have organized a society, and we call it Share Our Wealth Society, a society with the motto, every man a king. Every man a king, so there would be no such thing as a man or woman who did not have the necessities of life, who would not be dependent upon the whims and caprices and ipse dixit of the financial martyrs for a living. We propose to limit the wealth of big men in the country. We do not propose a division of wealth, but we propose to limit poverty that we will allow to be inflicted upon any man's family. We will not say we are going to guarantee any equality or $15,000 to families, no. But we do say that $5,000 is low enough for one family to hold, that there should be a guarantee of a family wealth of around 1/3 of the average, enough for a home, an automobile, a radio, and the opportunity to educate their children, a fair share of the income of this land thereafter to that family, so there will be no such thing as merely the select to have those things, and there will be no such thing as a family living in poverty and distress. Get together in your community tonight or tomorrow and organize one of our Share Our Wealth societies. If you do not understand it, write me and let me send you the platform. Let me get you the proof of it. Huey Long makes rhetorical class consciousness's call to action here, telling listeners that it's not as hard as they think, and that they can form a Share Our Wealth society in their own communities to take immediate action. Furthermore, Long fulfills another tenet of the rhetoric of class consciousness in his distillation of his complex ideas into simple terms. Most Americans of the time were not well educated enough to get the specifics of his proposals, so he skips over them. He speaks of them simply so that the, again I stress, population who were forced to work instead of going to school to feed their families is understanding and energized. The combination of politics and community is especially important in contemporary American politics. As the National Institute of Health found in March of 2023, Americans are becoming more and more socially isolated, spending less time year over year with friends and family. Since 2003, time Americans spent with others has declined 17%, an average of 608 less hours per year. The application of Long's work creates a bridge between community and politics that is not to be underestimated. Today, we broke down Every Man a King from the frame of reference of rhetorical class consciousness. First, we examined how Huey Long clearly identified his opponent of the American ruling class and showed how they inflict suffering upon the people. Then, we saw how the populist mastermind built support in a welcoming big tent, appealing to Americans' religious values. Finally, we observe how accessible he makes his call to action, encouraging Americans to share the wealth of their own communities. As populist fervor increasingly drives the political willpower of Americans today, it's important to recognize that while we only see populist rhetoric today used by the right wing, It's perfectly applicable from the left, too. I thank you, my friends, for your kind attention, and I hope you will enroll with us, take care of your own work in the work of this government, and share or help in our Share Our Wealth Society. I thank you.